Wells of Silence by TheBeckster, Chapter 26. Rex saw the speeder coming a mile away. It was making a beeline for the apartment building from the smoldering temple. Whoever it was, they weren't bringing good news. "Senator, we've got company." Padme jerked awake and scrambled out of the chair he had been dozing in ever since his return from the Senate. "Who is it?" "I don't know, but they're coming from the temple." "Anakin?" "I don't know. Go lock yourself in the nursery, to be safe." Padme responded quickly. Rex unholstered one of his blasters and stepped out of view from the veranda. He kept the approaching speeder in his sights, lining up on the pilot's head. Whoever it was kept a hood pulled over their head. They approached the veranda confidently. Clearly, they had been here before. They jumped out of the speeder before it had fully powered down. Rex still couldn't see their face. They were keeping their head bowed. If it had been Skywalker, she would have announced her presence by now. She knew Rex wouldn't take any chances while standing guard. It could be someone who was lost, confused, and shocked from recent events, or drunk, or perhaps a Jedi who survived the temple attack. They were wearing the Jedi's favored cloaks, or they could be an assassin. When the stranger punched in the code to drop the security screen, Rex decided he had gone far enough. "Freeze! Show me your hands." In less than a heartbeat, the stranger reacted. Rex saw a familiar flash blue and heard the hiss of a lightsaber igniting. So it was a Jedi. Rex could finally see his face. General Kenobi. Several tense and silent seconds passed as the two sized each other up. Rex saw a distinct wariness in the Jedi's eyes, a cold mistrust, a deep pain, something he had never seen before in Kenobi. What had he seen? "Lower your weapon, Rex." Obi-Wan's voice was as calm and even as ever. "Sorry, General, but I'll need you to lower yours first. You're intruding." There was a minute shift in Obi-Wan's facial expression. "Answer one question for me, Rex." What is that?" "Do you feel an inexplicable urge to shoot me?" Rex blinked. That was unexpected. "No, General." Obi-Wan visibly relaxed. His lightsaber was gone in a flash. Rex holstered his blasters as well. "What are you doing here, Rex?" "General Skywalker brought me here for protective detail." "Anakin? Is she here?" "No, General." "Do you know where she's gone?" "I'm afraid not, sir." Obi-Wan sighed and walked farther into the apartment. Rex watched the general collapse. A deep exhaustion bowed his shoulders as he stepped in. "Where's Padme?" "With the children in the nursery." The words had barely left Rex's mouth when Padme reappeared, cautiously peeking around the corner. "I didn't hear any blaster fire. I figured it was safe," he said quickly and quietly. He gasped, eyes wide with shock when he saw Obi-Wan. "You're safe!" Padme rushed forward and clasped Obi-Wan in a quick hug. Rex saw as he rushed forward that he tucked something small and silver into the folds of his jacket. A small blaster by the look of it. His embrace only lasted a second before the senator remembered himself and stepped back again. "What's going on, Obi-Wan?" "Palpatine called an emergency session. He said all of these terrible things. He said there was a coup, and the Jedi had rebelled against the Republic. They tried to assassinate him last night. He dismantled the Republic entirely and is now calling it the Galactic Empire." "Padme," Obi-Wan cut him off. "I will tell you what I can, but I need to know some things as well. Padme clamped his mouth shut. He wrapped his arms around himself tightly and nodded for Obi-Wan to ask his questions. And Anakin brought you here, Rex? The Jedi asked, turning to the clone. Yes, sir. When? Yesterday evening. Has she been back since? No, sir. Obi-Wan suppressed a sigh and turned to Padme. He took a deep breath and recounted the betrayal of the Jedi. Padme listened with increasing horror. Rex felt more and more nauseous as Kenobi spoke. The 501st, his brothers, had been the ones to storm the temple last night? Why? How could this possibly happen? And by Kenobi's report, all clones had turned on their Jedi? Cody had taken the first shot at the general? That just didn't make sense. They had spent 3 years fighting alongside each other across the galaxy. There was a mutual trust and respect between the Jedi and their clones. How could his brothers betray them? I don't understand, Padme said slowly, turning to look at Rex. If all the clones have turned, why hasn't Rex? Rex couldn't help but cross his arms cautiously. As both the senator and the general scrutinized him, he certainly didn't have any inexplicable murderous impulses regarding the general. And he still felt like himself. From what the general had described, his brothers had completely lost themselves. They weren't any different than droids. They had become the meat clankers the Seppies always claimed them to be. It could be because Rex has been here all night and day, Obi-Wan mused, stroking his beard. You haven't had any outside contact? No, sir. But for something of this magnitude to be executed, it had to be something other than a verbal command. Even a triggered phrase would have taken time to spread, and there would have been resistance from the troops if they were being ordered to kill their comrades. That is true, and this was almost as if a switch had been flipped. All of my clones went from shooting down droids to shooting at me in a matter of seconds. Kenobi trailed off as he noticed something. Rex, where did you get that scar? Which scar? On your head. Kenobi reached up and tapped at his own right temple. Rex reached up and brushed his fingers against the scarred patch on his temple. He had almost forgotten about that. It was the one scar he hadn't picked up in battle, and at 8 months old, it didn't really stand out much either. Oh, that was He paused and cleared his throat, suddenly remembering that having the scar was a direct act of insubordination. Technically, he had committed treason. Do you remember that mess with Fives and Tup several months back, General? Yes, Obi-Wan said searchingly. The inhibitor chips, correct? Tubbs malfunction, and a horrified realization dawned on him. He killed General Tiplar. After everything that happened to Fives, well, inhibitor or not, I didn't feel comfortable with that thing in my head. That must be it, Obi-Wan breathed. If every clone had a chip, the Kaminoans could have easily programmed a kill order into them. They could be deactivated remotely and in masse. Are you saying that the clones were always meant to kill the Jedi? Padme asked, incredulity and fear tainting his voice. I don't know, Obi-Wan admitted with a shake of his head. I don't know where the order originated, but Rex, you removing your chip was probably the best act of disobedience you ever made. So, did the Jedi turn on Palpatine? Is that where the order came from? Padme asked. Unease apparent on his face. I don't know. I only know what I've been able to gather from Master Yoda and Senator Organa. We were able to change the recall code. Any surviving Jedi shouldn't fall into the trap here. Our next step is to eliminate the Sith threat before they can cause any more damage to the galaxy. Then why are you here? Padme asked. You didn't just stop by for a chat. Anakin was at the temple last night. Did something happen to her? Yes and no. Kenobi paused and let a heavy silence fall between his words. He looked away from the senator, but Rex saw the pain etch even deeper lines into his face. Padme, Anakin has fallen to the dark side. The senator shook his head insistently. No. That's not possible. Not my Anakin. She wouldn't. Padme, I saw Obi-Wan. She's my wife. Padme shouted, surprising both the Jedi and Rex. I know her as well as I know myself. She would never turn to the dark side. Padme, I saw security holograms at the temple. Obi-Wan stopped to collect himself. Rex followed his gaze to the nursery. She led the attack. She murdered younglings. No, she couldn't. Padme stepped back with a soft, despairing no. When his legs hit the couch, he collapsed into it, burying his face in his hands. Rex felt shocked to his very core, and the only thing stopping him from collapsing into a chair like Padme was his training kicking in. General Skywalker was many things, and even capable of stretching ethics in some cases, but she was not a cold-blooded killer. She was not a youngling murderer, and yet he knew General Kenobi was telling the truth. Situations like this required action and resolution, not despair. Rex drew a deep breath. This isn't like General Skywalker. Has she lost her mind? He knew now that his brothers had marched on the temple. His battalion had done their fair share of killing the Jedi, but they had those damn chips in their brains. They had no control over their actions. Skywalker must have had complete control. Obi-Wan fixed Rex with a complex look. She was manipulated by Palpatine. The Chancellor? He is the Sith Lord. He has been orchestrating everything since the beginning. Obi-Wan took a deep breath, but in the end, Anakin chose to turn to the dark side. But Skywalker is one of the most powerful Jedi I've seen. How could she be manipulated by Palpatine? How could she choose the dark side? We were all manipulated by Palpatine, Obi-Wan reminded him gently. As for Anakin, it was the nightmares, Padme spoke up, lifting his head from his hands. Her visions. She was afraid of losing our children. She was afraid of losing me. She never told me she was still having visions, Obi-Wan muttered. Why would she? You told her to ignore them. Padme looked down at his folded hands. I told her the same thing. She didn't listen to me either. She must have told Palpatine. Palpatine would have fed her fears by forcing her visions through the dark side. And they spent so much time together these last 6 months. Padme finished Obi-Wan's thought. He buried his face in his hands again. We fed her right to him, Kenobi finished hollowly and horrified. Rex waited a moment, seeing if Obi-Wan had more to add, but he seemed quite wrapped up in his guilt at the moment. But now was not the time for remorse. Now was the time for action. So what's the plan, General? Obi-Wan shook his head, as if shaking off his encroaching guilt. I must know where Anakin has gone. She must be stopped. You're going to kill her, aren't you? Padme's voice was suddenly cold. Obi-Wan opened his mouth to reassure Padme, but he was cut off. Don't. I've known the Jedi long enough to know what stopped means in context with the Sith. Rex raised a curious eyebrow. He had seen many people try and take General Skywalker's life, and he had seen just as many fail. She was hard to kill, but so was General Kenobi. He had survived Cody turning on him after all. If anyone could possibly take down Skywalker in a fight, it would be him. If it came down to it, I would have to kill her to stop her. I hope it doesn't get that far. That's why I need your help, Padme. I need to know where she's gone. I won't. I won't help you murder my wife. I won't help you take my children's mother away from them. They need her. I need her. Obi-Wan wasn't going to get the information he needed from the senator. He turned and gave Rex a sharp look. Rex. The clone shook his head. I'm sorry, General Kenobi, but Skywalker didn't tell me where she was going. Obi-Wan turned back to Padme one last time. Padme, he asked softly, pleadingly. Think of your children. If she's not well, she could get out. Padme's voice was pure venom. Obi-Wan stepped back, head bowed, arms crossed. I'm sorry. I am so very sorry, Padme. He looked to Rex. Keep them safe. Then, without another word, he turned and went to his speeder. Rex watched it disappear into Coruscant traffic, wishing more than ever that he wasn't being left behind for protection. If he was going to fight Skywalker, Kenobi would need his help. Desperation made people dangerous. Half an hour later, Rex was following Padme across a landing platform towards his ship. Padme's security captain, Typho, if he remembered correctly, was quite vocally protesting the senator's plans. Padme wasn't hearing it. He had quite pointedly ignored Rex's protestations as well. Now the clone had nothing to do but follow orders and follow the senator. Senator, are you sure you don't need an escort? Typho asked for the fifth time. Rex couldn't help but think that the captain was terrible at following orders, as Padme had already dismissed his concerns 4 times prior. Then again, in this situation, Rex wasn't sure he'd be one blindly following orders either. I'm going after Anakin. Rex is all the security I need, Padme stated with finality before carrying the twins into the ship. Rex didn't miss the distrustful look Typho gave him, but he ignored it. The captain had reason to be suspicious. No doubt he heard what the clones had done. In his eyes, Rex was a potential time bomb. Still, Typho had made his opinions quite clear, and he couldn't force the senator to take extra protection. He and Rex were both aware that the clone was the best protection the senator could have short of a Jedi. So, jaw tight and fist clenched at his side, Typho bowed to his senator, nodded to Rex, and turned away from the ship. Rex surveyed the deck one final time before he entered the ship as well. He pretended to ignore the brown flash of Jedi robes that he caught in the corner of his eye. He certainly felt better about going to find Skywalker with Kenobi stewing away. Padme could tell something was bothering Rex. He had expected the clone to relax significantly once they were wrapped in the relative safety of hyperspace, but he had only grown more agitated as the hours passed. Whatever it was, Padme was sure it'd come to light eventually. The fastest route to Mustafar from Coruscant was still nearly a 2-day flight. Long, boring flights would drag the deepest secrets out of anyone, even a clone, and Padme's yacht was luxurious, but not particularly spacious. For the first 4 or so hours of the flight, Rex contained himself to the cockpit, while Padme flitted back and forth to the stateroom, where the twins had been settled in. The children were fussy and reluctant to settle. He knew they missed Anakin. She'd never been away from them for more than a few hours, and by this point she'd been gone for over a day. Padme couldn't be sure if it was some nascent force ability and they could sense something was wrong with their mother, or if it was just normal infant separation anxiety. Padme heaved a sigh as he completed his 50th lap around the stateroom. Luke and Leia were cradled against his chest in a carrier, and both were stubbornly refusing to sleep. Maybe a change of scenery or ambient noise would help. Padme knew that if he had to walk any more circles around the room, he was going to start losing it. So he set his feet in the direction of the bridge, and he was unsurprised to see Rex still sitting in the co-pilot's seat, dutifully watching over the readouts. The clone stood quickly as Padme entered the cockpit. His right hand flew up into a salute. Senator. Padme smiled placidly as he settled into the pilot's chair. Rex, it's going to be a very long trip if you jump to salute every time I enter a room. You know you don't have to do that. Rex relaxed with a little sigh. Sorry, Senator. It's a force of habit. I know, Rex. The clone sat back in his seat, looking at the twins. They're still awake? I thought you put them down an hour ago. Padme shrugged and stroked Leia's downy, soft hair. They won't settle. I think they miss Anakin. Was all Rex had to offer. He returned to his seat and the readouts. Padme let an uncomfortable silence fall over the cockpit. The change of scenery did seem to be helping the twins settle down more, and he wasn't going to risk keeping them awake with further conversation. A few times Rex opened his mouth and turned to him, as if to say something, but he stopped when he caught sight of the twins and turned back to his console. Finally, after about half an hour, Padme was confident that the twins had finally fallen asleep and would stay asleep if he put them back in the stateroom. He silently signed to Rex that he'd be back in a minute and left the cockpit. The twins hardly stirred as Padme settled them down, and he breathed a little easier. They should be out for an hour or two, which would give him plenty of time to figure out what exactly was bothering Rex. Somewhat surprisingly, the clone was standing and waiting for his return when he entered the cockpit. Rex didn't waste any time. Senator, I must confess an act of insubordination. You, Rex? Padme tried to ask casually, but he couldn't help the thrill of fear and panic that shot through his heart. Had Rex betrayed them? Perhaps a chip in the clone's head wasn't the cause for their treachery. Rex stiffened, guilt evident on his face, but he refused to look away. General Kenobi is on the ship. I saw him stew aboard before we left Coruscant, and I said nothing. Padme sighed explosively, simultaneously relieved and angered. The twins were going to be safe. On the other hand, Obi-Wan was using Padme to get to Anakin. I should have known he'd do something like that. Padme growled. I'm sorry for withholding that truth, Senator. Rex continued. I will accept any punishment you deem necessary. Padme drew a deep breath and pinched the bridge of his nose. I'm sure you didn't mean any harm by it, Rex. You trust Obi-Wan, and I know he wouldn't harm the children. But I also know he has intentions of harming, if not killing, General Skywalker. Padme couldn't help but flinch at the clone's words. He couldn't let Anakin get hurt anymore by this. Whatever had happened, whatever she had done, it wasn't her in control. Choices be damned. Anakin had been manipulated by Palpatine into doing everything. His Anakin, his wife and soulmate, the mother of their beautiful children, would never ever choose those horrid actions on her own volition. He knew Anakin hadn't been in control, but she wasn't unreachable. She didn't have to die for her puppet master's actions. Do you know where he's hiding? No, sir. The ship is only so big. Padme grit his teeth and pictured the ship in his mind. There weren't a lot of hiding places in the yacht. He'd been wandering in between most of the living spaces over the last several hours. Obi-Wan might be hiding in the engine room, but R2-D2 had been in and out of it ever since they left Coruscant. The droid would have told him if he saw something. His deepest rooted base programming to serve the king was still in place. That left a handful of storage closets tucked into odd corners of the ship. There was one in particular that was almost immediately visible from the entrance. I think I know where he is. Padme marched off, motioning for Rex to follow him. The common area of the yacht was central in the ship, offering access to nearly any other section. Padme had passed through it several times in the last few hours. It had a small seating and dining area, a didgeridoo board that had been programmed for several other games, the first aid station, and a small berth that could be used as a bench or bed in an emergency. It also had a conveniently human-sized closet that Padme knew for a fact was empty. Padme stopped several feet from the closet and planted his feet, arms crossed. Stop pretending you're still hiding, Obi-Wan. There was no response for a second or two. Then the door slid open and Obi-Wan stepped out, unfolding from what appeared to be an uncomfortable position. So this is what you stooped to? Padme asked disdainfully, crossing his arms tightly. Kenobi had no response. Were you just going to hide in the closet for 2 days until we got to Mustafar? If necessary, yes. He said it so neutrally, as if he wasn't currently as torn up about current events as Padme was. Something in him snapped, and before he realized what he was doing, he had grabbed Obi-Wan by the lapels and had shoved him back against the wall. From the corner of his eyes, Padme saw Rex start forward slightly to intervene, but Obi-Wan barely even reacted. It was his lack of response that made Padme release him almost as soon as he shoved Obi-Wan. The Jedi should have been able to easily stop Padme from manhandling him, particularly given that Kenobi had several inches on Padme and decades of Jedi training. Padme stepped back several feet, breathing heavily through his nose and glaring daggers at the Jedi. You know I'd be well within my rights to throw you out in the airlock. You are a stowaway on my ship with the intentions of harming my family. The ship doesn't have an airlock, Obi-Wan said quietly, neutrally. I guess that's a stroke of luck in your favor then. Padme's rage burned away quickly. As he studied the Jedi across from him, something had disconnected in Obi-Wan. Perhaps it was the shock of recent events finally settling in, or more likely he had already resigned himself to killing Anakin. and had mentally and emotionally distanced himself until the task was complete. Knowing the Jedi, the latter was more likely. Padme scoffed and half turned away. His rage might have dissipated, but righteous anger simmered in his gut, and he suddenly found an opportunity to air his grievances on the behalf of his wife. It's not like Obi-Wan could run away from this confrontation. Criff, no wonder Anakin doesn't trust you. That finally raised a response from Obi-Wan. Hurt and confusion furrowed his brow and pulled his mouth into a frown. A similar confusion crossed Rex's face. Oh, don't act like you didn't criffing know, Padme snapped. To heck with filters and politeness. This was neither the time nor place for such restrictions. I don't... Obi-Wan began to form a protest, but it fell away. Please, with everything you've done to her over the course of this war, how could she possibly still trust you? Padme pointed to the bench over by the Dejeric table. Sit down. To his surprise, both Obi-Wan and Rex followed his command. Padme stood over them, glaring down, his arms crossed tightly to keep his hands from shaking. It's a good thing we're 2 days out from Mustafar, because I have plenty to say. Should I start with the most recent incident when you turned Anakin into the Jedi Council mere hours after she'd given birth to twins? Or should I go down the list of severity, starting with the Harden mess? End of chapter.